One of the new topics in the 7th edition of the APM's Body of Knowledge is a deployment baseline. And we talk about deployment baselines for both linear and iterative life cycles. So in this brief video, we're going to look at what they are and how do they work. So the APM define a deployment baseline as the process for agreeing an integrated plan to enable the management of the deployment. So it's a plan, basically. It's related to the project management plan for the project, and it sets out the baselines, the plans for the implementation of the project. But what do we mean by plans? Is it just a Gantt chart? What does it actually mean? So for a linear life cycle, you'll probably know we start off with concept, and then we do definition. So at the end of concept, we have a business case, and then here we have a project management plan, and then we deliver that project management plan, then we transition that into operations and then get the benefits. So that's a classic linear life cycle. So there, what we're trying to do is control time, quality and scope and money, and we're trying to agree baselines for those three factors. So how do we do that? Well, classically what we'd do is we'd come up with some form of scope definition, either using a product breakdown structure or work breakdown structure, or a set of requirements, or sometimes all three. We then develop that into a schedule, and we'd have a baseline plan, this one at the bottom, which is the agreed plan that we sign off in the deployment phase before we're at the end of definition phase. And then from that baseline plan, we'll develop a cost baseline. So that cost baseline will show what our planned expenditure is going to be over the duration of the project. So we normally talk about those three baselines: scope of the project, the time for the project, and the costs of the baselines. And we lock down those baselines, and we try to control changes. We can't try to minimize the risks that might threaten those baselines, and we try to identify any issues that may cause those baselines to go off plan. And the aim is to deliver the project in accordance with the plan. So as they say, plan the work, work the plan. That's not quite true, actually, because quite often we'll have the concept of rolling wave, where we break this plan into stages, and we'll develop the latter stages will be just quite high level, and then as we proceed through the project, we'll iteratively develop those latter stages. But that's sort of blurring the difference between linear and iterative. So in the pure world, those are the baselines that we're talking about for linear life cycles. What does that look like for an iterative life cycle? Well, an iterative life cycle, you'll have a pre-project phase where you look at strategic alignment and financial resources and financial viability of the project. You'll then do some feasibility studies to say whether you've got the resources in place, whether you have the objectives right, whether technically it's worthwhile investing in the project. Then you might do some foundational work. So that might be proof of concept, that might be looking at technical challenges, building some models, and usually using MOSCO: must have, should have, could have, would have. So at the end of that, you'll have some high level requirements, and also you'll have an idea of what the number of iterations that you're going to have to execute in order to deliver the functionality required. And then instead of trying to lock down the scope, what we do is we iteratively develop the scope with the users. So we build a progressive level of prototypes or functional products that we show to users. They get the users to review it, we deploy that, and then we get feedback from those users. It might be the way around. And then we build another version, and we iteratively work towards the full functionality that we set out in the feasibility stage. Then once we're happy that the product, usually a software product, meets the functionality of the users, we then deploy that out to a wider user base and do lessons learned review. So each iteration has a sort of planning phase. We plan the project, we build a working version, we review that with the users, we deploy that, and then we plan based on feedback what we're going to do during the next iteration. So we progressively go around this iterative loop, developing the functionality as we go. So what does that look as a baseline? Well, one of the things you have to decide is how many iterations do you think broadly you're going to have during the life of the project. So we're going to have 5, 6, 10, however many. And actually, in reality, once you've got a product live, maybe a website or something like that, you don't actually stop. You will probably keep on improving it and iterating it during the operational phase. And then for each iteration, we usually prioritize the functionality that we want to develop during each of those phases. So this stage, we may focus on fundamentals of the data science or data modeling or the analytics that we want to run, the databases we have to use. And then these latter phases, iterations, we may move the focus onto the graphic user interface or ergonomics of using it. So the second part of the baseline was, what resources do we think we're going to need in each iteration? How many people? 4, 5, 10, 50, 100, whatever. And then from there, from knowing how many people we need in each of these iterations and what their skills are, given that some people are more expensive than other people, we can then work out what the cost curve. I've just done it as linear, but clearly some iterations may be more expensive than others. So what would the deployment baselines look for iterative lifecycle? It's the number of iterations, the number of resources that we need in each of these time boxes, and the costs that we associate with each of those time boxes. So in comparison, linear life cycles have a fixed scope, a fixed timeline, and fixed budget mostly, except for like rolling wave approaches. We try to control the changes and the risks to stay within the baseline. We try and fully develop the scope before we start. So some projects like building bridges or towers or structures, usually it's good to know fully what the scope is before you start the construction. And they're good for projects with known requirements and known delivery methods, or where it's possible to define those. Iterative life cycles, the budget and timeline are fixed at the start mostly, but the scope varies with each iteration depending on the feedback from the users. We can then, it can be difficult to predict when the project will finish, if ever actually, because you may continue to iterate and innovate throughout the project. But they're good for projects with known delivery methods but poorly defined scope. So we know what technology that we're going to use, we just don't know how we're going to deploy that technology. So I hope you find that useful. I hope that gives you some hints for what a deployment baseline is in those two sections. So if you enjoyed it, please, and got any questions, please do get in touch or subscribe or follow us.